In Superman, a pair of glasses was used to help you see a man as either Clark Kent or Superman. In the 1989 comedy Weekend at Bernie's, a pair of sunglasses was used to make you think a dead man was alive. We'll take a look back at this comedy hit on the next Back to the Future.
Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
Weekend at Bernie's takes a single joke and stretches it out for an entire movie. In my opinion, its success is mostly due to the performance of the two leads, Andrew McCarthy and Jonathan Silverman. Andrew McCarthy was coming off some big hits like St. Elmo's Fire and Pretty in Pink. Jonathan Silverman wasn't as big of a star, but he made a splash in Brighton Beach Memoirs. Of course, the movie would be nowhere without Bernie himself, Mr. Terry Kiser. Kiser had done mostly episodic TV appearances before appearing in Friday the 13th Part 7 the year before becoming Bernie. Yes, he spends most of the movie just being a ragdoll bouncing from one crazy scenario to the next, but he's really good at it. McCarthy and Silverman play Larry and Richard respectively. In this odd couple, Larry's the slob and goof-off, while Richard is the well-dressed goody two-shoes. They're low-level accounting employees at a New York insurance company ran by Bernie Lomax. They uncover a $2 million error that they think will help their careers. All they have to do is bring it to Bernie's attention and they'll be heroes. The next morning, on their way to become heroes, we're introduced to Catherine Mary Stewart as Gwen Saunders. She's a summer intern that Richard's been too chicken to ask out. Richard finally approaches Gwen but chokes. Fortunately for him, she finds his embarrassment cute for some reason and he scores a date with her. The boys meet with Bernie and tell him about their discovery. He says there's a bright future ahead for them and invites them to his beach house in the Hamptons to work on researching the numbers. The boys are more than excited as they walk out of his office. What they don't know is that Bernie is the one behind the scam they uncovered. Bernie meets with his mob partner Vito and asks him to kill Larry and Richard. He even suggests Vito make it look like a murder-suicide. Vito agrees to the request and will have his main hitman Paulie do the deed. And you may recognize Paulie here because he's played by Don Calfa, who was amazing in Return of the Living Dead. After Bernie leaves, Vito changes the plan and tells Paulie to take care of Bernie instead because he's become too careless and greedy. It turns out Bernie has a thing going on with Vito's girlfriend Tina. Never shit where you eat, Bernie. Richard has his date with Gwen and everything is going well, but it was her last day at work and this will be their only night together because she's headed back home the next day. They don't want the date to end just yet, so she suggests that they go back to his place because she's got 5 roommates. It's expensive to live in New York, people. When they get back to his place, she questions why he's tiptoeing in his own place and oddly whispering. He makes excuses about the neighbors downstairs getting mad when he makes noise. For some reason, she's very impressed by the outdated decor, and you could tell this is all going to blow up in his face. You see, he kind of left out one little tidbit about himself and his retro decor. The dude lives with his parents. He only makes the situation worse by telling Gwen that his parents passed away. And I remember watching this scene in the theater and it was like watching a train wreck. The sympathy move actually worked though as they start making out on the couch. But Richard's moment is quickly interrupted by an older guy in his underwear walking into the room. The quickest and lamest explanation for the intruder is that he's his butler. Richard's a terrible liar and Gwen's not stupid. She sees right through his bullshit and leaves. So Richard's pretty much a dumbass. The next day, Bernie's heading out to his beach house. We see him pull up in his speedboat and then hop in his golf cart that looks like a Porsche. He's living the dream. Paulie arrives on the ferry and calls Bernie for his address. Bernie makes it to the phone just as the answering machine picks up, and he tells Paulie that he's way too early because Larry and Richard aren't going to be there until the 6 o'clock ferry. Larry and Richard are cruising out to the island on the ferry, and Larry is having a great time while Richard just sits and whines about his failed date with Gwen. Paulie shows up at Bernie's and asks for a cigarette. When Bernie reaches for one, Paulie sticks him in the ass with a needle. Whatever it was, it stops Bernie in his tracks and puts a smile on his face. Paulie helps him into the chair and puts the needle in a bag of cocaine in his pocket. He puts Bernie's sunglasses on his face and then heads out disguised as a priest, feeling pretty pleased with himself. On his way back to the ferry, he's actually stopped by Larry asking for directions. Larry and Richard find the house and are in awe of the luxury they've found themselves in. They just can't believe their good fortune. Larry promptly makes himself at home while Richard wonders where their host is. They find Bernie in his office chair and assume he's sleeping, but then Richard finds the drugs. He checks his breath and his pulse and tells Larry that Bernie's dead. First they're bummed because it means their weekend is ruined, but then panic sets in as they're worried that the police might think that they had something to do with it. And here's where the fun and mayhem starts. People start showing up to Bernie's house to party, and the boys are standing there while Bernie sits on the couch dead as a doornail. Within minutes, the house is packed full of people who are oblivious to the fact that Bernie's dead. They don't seem fazed at all when Bernie doesn't respond back to them. The boys are completely dumbfounded by what they're watching. As they watch people interact with Bernie, you can see the wheels spinning in Larry's head. Before Richard can call the police, Larry lays out his master plan. Let's just pretend Bernie didn't die. That's it. That's the plan. Richard doesn't want to go along with it and goes back to calling the police. But he changes his mind as soon as he sees Gwen walking up to the house. Maybe there's something to Larry's plan after all. Richard pleads his case with Gwen, and oddly she's pretty quick to forgive him. She wants to talk to Bernie, but the boys rush in and move him before she can get to him. They accidentally drop him over the deck rail onto the beach when they spot Gwen leaving the house. Richard rushes down to the beach to catch up to her. She takes him to the top of a nearby lighthouse to check out the view. They make it to the top, and Richard accidentally looks right into the light. Now blinded, he stumbles around and falls back down the stairs. See, he's a bit of a dumbass. They laugh it off, and she helps him limp back up the beach. Along the way, they lay down and start making out. And in the heat of passion, Bernie's body washes up alongside him. Gwen doesn't see him, but Richard does. Way to kill the mood, Bernie. He gets her out of there and rushes back to find Larry so they can go fish Bernie out of the water. They get him back to the house just as Vito's girlfriend Tina shows up. They've got Bernie stashed up in the bedroom, and she's demanding to see him. She pulls a knife on the boys, and they give up Bernie's location without hesitation. She stomps upstairs, leaving the boys to think the fun is pretty much over now. Outside, one of Vito's men is watching as Tina enters Bernie's bedroom with a knife. She drops the knife and jumps in the bed while Vito's guy watches through his binoculars. The boys are confused because Tina's been up there quite a while. Then she comes down the stairs singing and looking pretty happy. Yep, she screwed a corpse. What's an 80s comedy without a little necrophilia? Vito gets the call about Bernie still being alive and still sleeping with Tina. They chalk it up to Paulie being a bit rusty. Richard wakes up the next day to find that Larry is already up and hanging out with Bernie out back by the pool. He's got Bernie's arm rigged with a string so he can make him wave, and he's got a fly swatter to keep the flies off Bernie. Seems women aren't the only thing Bernie's attracting these days. Vito has sent Paulie back to the island to fix his mistake, and Gwen shows up at the house wanting to chat with Bernie. Richard tries to run interference while Larry goes to move Bernie. The whole time, Paulie is sneaking around under the deck. While Larry is trying to figure out where to hide Bernie, Richard tries to confess the truth to Gwen. As soon as he says that Bernie is dead, she stops listening since he's used the dead story before. Larry ends up dumping Bernie over the side of the deck again, but this time he lands right next to Paulie, who instantly starts strangling him. Since Gwen doesn't believe him, Richard takes her outside to see Bernie. He's not there though because he's on the ground being choked out by Paulie, who thinks he's killed him once and for all. This time he even checks his pulse to be sure. With no Bernie to be found, Gwen leaves in a huff. Richard is pissed at Larry, so he decides he's going to call the police again. When he tries to use Bernie's office phone, the answer machine starts playing the last message. Unfortunately, the last message is Bernie talking to Paulie about killing Larry and Richard. Obviously not what they wanted to hear about their beloved boss. On the call, Bernie mentioned a note, so they go searching for it. During the search, Richard finds a briefcase full of cash along with the note. The note is a confession from Larry saying that they stole the money from the company to pay for Larry's sex change operation. But now Richard loves someone else, so he's going to commit murder-suicide. On the tape, Bernie requested that the boys not be killed while he's around. This gives Larry the bright idea that they'll be safe as long as they're around Bernie. There's actually some logic to that, so good for you, Larry. They find Bernie being buried in the sand by some little a-hole kid. They run the kid off and give Bernie a good vacuum cleaning, and during the cleaning they find out Bernie had another secret. He wore a toupee. Before they could process the toupee revelation, they're interrupted by the sound of gunfire. They dive for cover and find out that the sounds are coming from that little shit from earlier. Where's this kid's parents? They run the kid off again and staple the toupee back onto Bernie's melon. Now that he's all cleaned up, it's time to take Bernie for a drive on his golf cart. They head to the docks to see if they can catch the ferry, but they don't make it in time. They do, however, get close enough for Paulie, who's already on the ferry, to see Bernie back up and about. They remember that Bernie has a boat, so they go back to the house to get the keys. While they're there, a disgruntled ex-employee sneaks in and Richard brains him with some firewood. Just then the gardener shows up and Richard brains him too. They shove the two men into the pantry and head back out to the boat. They tie Bernie down in the back seat and Larry takes the wheel. This is a big mistake because he's an idiot and has no idea how to drive it. Finally, away from the docks, Richard is now driving, which isn't much better. Both of these guys are seriously spatially unaware of their surroundings. Their lack of any kind of aquatic driving skills throws Bernie overboard. Neither one notices at first, but luckily for them, they tied Bernie up with a ski rope. So guess what? Bernie's going water skiing. They don't know anything about channel markers, so they just stay as close to them as they can. As they pass each one, a bell rings, and after about the third time, Larry finally turns around and sees Bernie in the water. They fish him out and head back out on the water where they run out of gas. For some reason, they decide to paddle back to land using Bernie as a flotation device. Meanwhile, back on shore, Paulie charters a boat to get back to the island. The boys make it back to the house with Bernie, and Gwen spots them. She follows him up to the house and confronts Richard about why he's being so weird. Larry drags Bernie down the stairs to prove to her that Richard is telling the truth. She freaks out just as the two men from the pantry break out. Richard and Larry knock them out again, and then Paulie comes rushing in. He sees Bernie sitting on the stairs and starts shooting him. This is all pretty normal at this point for Larry and Richard, but Gwen is like, what the fuck? Paulie turns and starts shooting at them as he chases them all through the house. They split up, and Larry, in a rare act of bravery, subdues Paulie all by himself. In the epilogue, the police show up, Larry is a hero, and Paulie is led away in a straitjacket because he thinks Bernie is still alive. Gwen has invited Richard to stay with her for a couple days before she goes back to school, and Larry, not wanting to be a third wheel, decides to hang out at Bernie's for a bit. In one last hurrah for the dead guy joke, Bernie's body is strapped to a gurney when it rolls down the ramp, tossing him onto the beach, where he lands right next to Richard, Gwen, and Larry. They freak out and the movie ends as little Damien shows up to bury Bernie in the sand again. Roll credits. So it's a gimmick movie, sure, but it's still funny. I remember having a great time the first time I saw this in the theater. Somehow this movie managed to get a sequel in 1993 with McCarthy, Silverman, and Kiser all returning. Not sure how much they got paid to come back, but it didn't matter since it bombed pretty badly. I mean, it was really bad. Do you think this movie still holds up after all these years? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this trip down memory lane, please hit the like and subscribe buttons below to help grow this channel. I appreciate you taking time out of your day and hope you will come back for the next Back to the Feature.
Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.